Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Steve Jewell. I'm with Community Giving, and we're delighted to have you with us today to have a very important conversation in our community. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give people just a few minutes here to gather and to get into the room and sign on to the webinar. So if you can bear with us just a few minutes as we have people join us. So once again, welcome. We want to thank all of you for taking time out of your day to join us today for what we believe is a very important conversation for us to have. We've been having these community connections webinars ever since the stay-at-home order has been in place, and this has been an opportunity for us as a community foundation and actually our partner foundations to stay in touch with our communities and to learn from you all as well as from each other. And with everything that is going on, we thought today's topic was most important. And so we're really pleased to have you join us, and we have a great program lined up, and there will be opportunities for question and answers. Please just put your questions in the bottom, and we will have time as we get through all of our speakers today to hopefully answer all of your questions. We are recording the webinar, so you also will be able to tune in at another time on our website to be able to see the webinar if you care to refer back to it or if you need to leave early. I want to start by just reading you a statement on that we have developed here at Community Giving that we feel is important. We call it our anti-racism statement. And during these times, we think it's more important than ever that we have a focus of what we believe. And I just want to read that to start with. And that, first of all, is our hearts go out to the family of George Floyd and all those who have suffered over the years due to racism in our communities. Racism is present in all of the communities we serve, and confronting it will be no easy task. We at Community Giving and our partner foundations stand united against all forms of racism, hate, bigotry, and discrimination towards all Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We stand in support of work that empowers people and builds community. We support building bridges and developing trust and understanding across race, class, and culture. Across the communities we serve, we are committed to examining ourselves as individuals, learning about our conscious and unconscious biases, and taking action to become allies within our communities. Examining our organizations and the organizations we fund and making the changes necessary to address systemic racism. Examining our communities and work with allies and partners in creating the changes necessary to address systemic racism. And creating the space to have open dialogue and discussion to develop greater trust and understanding on the issue of racism, both internally and across the communities we serve. We will stand with the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community to listen, support, and encourage. In all that we do, in all the work, in all that we do, we will work towards building true and authentic community where all voices are at the table so policies and decisions can be examined through a racial lens, and so that the voices of the Black, Indigenous, and people of color community can be a part of charting our future and the future of our communities. That's our statement. And so again, welcome and thank you for being a part of this discussion. I'm now going to turn this over to the leader, our executive director of the Central Minnesota Community Foundation, Carol Turnow. Carol?
Thank you very much, Steve. Today we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Many of our organizations have looked at ways to incorporate DEI into our nonprofit work. What we have seen as the pandemic and preparation to combat it has unfolded is an increase in inequity. Marginalized community members are experiencing a significantly greater negative impact, both economically and health-wise. This same group is also falling behind educationally and face greater housing insecurity and food scarcity. The killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis a few weeks ago brought to the forefront the societal issues around racial inequity and the need for change. Nonprofits and foundations can and should help to make societal changes to celebrate our diversity, create an equitable system, and be inclusive to all of our community. Today's webinar focuses on ways your nonprofit and us as foundations can be part of the solution by understanding what we can do as individuals, as organizations, as a community, and as a society. Deborah Lee, CMCF's chair, will share about anti-racism and how, as a society, it is time for a paradigm shift and what that looks like. Chris Hewitt, Executive Director of the Charities Review Council, will share an assessment tool that nonprofits can utilize to learn about how to tie DEI to your mission. Finally, we will hear from Phyllis Braxton, CEO and founder of Pink Consulting LLC, who will discuss the IDI, an Intercultural Development Inventory, which assesses individuals as well as the organization's intercultural competency. These are all tools that can help us to learn more and potentially find a path that our organizations can take to develop a strategy and provide education to our staffs and boards. We begin with Deborah Lee. Deborah has served as the CMCF board or on the CMCF board since 2015 and currently serves as our chair. She has led the CARE program, Community Anti-Racism Education Initiative at St. Cloud State University since 2004, presenting workshops on anti-racism all over central Minnesota. She is now serving as Vice President of Equity and Inclusion at St. Cloud Technical and Community College. Deborah, welcome.
Thank you, Carol. It's a pleasure to be here. I wanted to talk about Kuhn's theory of paradigm shift. And Kuhn is a scientist who actually died in 1996. He was an American philosopher of science. And he argued in his book that the structure of science, or the name of the book is The Structure of Science, and he argued that observations don't exist in a vacuum. And he kind of describes our observations as our truths, the lived experiences that we have and the things we consider to be true and that we agree on are true. So those observations don't exist in a vacuum. Instead, they are contained in a theory. And so most of us see the world through a collection of facts, or our truths and observations. And so I put together this little experiment that I'd like to share with you about how this theory works. You can, let me see if you can see. You can see my little experiment here with coins and the container here. Okay, so it appears that progress is a process of addition. So if we think of each one of these coins as our truths, our thoughts, and each one of our truths and thoughts are contained in a container, right? And we drop them right in here. And as long as we have the container and the truths, and we all agree that these are the truths that our community lives by, this works really fine. But Kuhn's argued that observations do not exist in a vacuum. Instead, they're contained in a theory. So the container is our theory. And there's a story that explains the meaning of the observations. A dominant theory is called a paradigm, and the observations are placed within that paradigm. Now, a problem occurs when the observations that are made do not fit the paradigm. So if I drop in a nickel instead of a penny or a dime, kind of creates a little clog there. And the truth can no longer get into this container, right? And if I try to put even a quarter in, same thing happens. The quarter doesn't even get past the top. See, the ideas can't go. So then we have to consider what are the new truths? If we have this as a problem, then what are the new truths, the new observations that are not being contained by this container? In order for us to shift to a new theory, or when a new theory is proposed, new observations are taken into consideration, then we have to probably do away with this as a container and start a new container that can hold the problem and the new observations, okay? But we can't really get to this unless we completely destroy this. We have to let go of this container in order to begin a new container that can hold the theories and the problem. But even this container is still only good until another problem arises. And then we have to destroy this container as well and find a new container that can hold the problems and the observations or the truths also around this problem. So I use this as a way to ask those of you who are working in the community foundations, what's the story around your community foundation? What's the dominant theory that has led your community foundation for the last 10, 15, 20, 50 years? What observations does your community now have that no longer fits the old container for your community foundation? And what are you willing to let go of, destroy, literally destroy, in order to replace that old paradigm with a new paradigm? So problems occur when observations are made and when observations don't fit into the paradigm. A crisis occurs when too many observations don't fit into the old container. And so what are you willing to do in order to create that new container and hold the new observation, the new truths that are part of your community?
Thank you, Deborah. I know that there was, you were going to talk a little bit, and if you would, about what you have seen in particular with the, giving an example of some of the societal changes, and they may not even be changes, there are more possibly things that we just haven't been aware of. Those of us that are of the white society have been able to ignore certain things and not realize what was happening. So could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. I'm thinking about COVID-19 and what's going on with COVID-19 right now and in the educational system. Now, there have always been problems within the educational system, but when we were required to go online as a part of our social distancing, not everybody has access to technology. Not everybody has access to internet. And even for some people who do have access to internet, it's not enough to hold the number of users that are in their home. And so my question is, in terms of looking at the container, how do we look at the system of technology as it has been created for us, and think about how do we really provide access to that system of technology that will hold everyone in the community. We talk kind of around that as an issue. So access to the internet is limited. And why? Why is it limited? If the technology is there, why is it limited? And it's an economic question as well as a question about service. And how do we as a community begin to explore that question in ways that provides access even to those that may not have money? How do we provide access for the least of those who are in our community? What does that look like? How do we have that conversation? Who starts it? When do we begin it? And how do we solve the issue of access to internet in ways that makes sense for the whole community?
Great. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be Chris Hewitt, and she is the Executive Director of the Charities Review Council. In Chris's 8 years in her role as Executive Director of the Charities Review Council, she has focused on building authentic and engaged relationships between donors and nonprofits to create strong, more vibrant, and just communities while expanding online and cloud-based tools. In 2017, the Council launched the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Toolkit, whereby nonprofits can collect strong internal and external demographic data while helping them uncover the gaps between intention and perception of how policy and power move through their organization. And we're really pleased to have Chris with us today to talk about the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Toolkit. Chris?
Sorry, I planned to unmute myself and I didn't. So thanks so much, Steve. I really appreciate the chance to be here today to talk about our toolkit. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And as Steve mentioned, this is a tool and it's a resource that's for nonprofits that allows them to be able to collect reliable internal and external demographic data, understand how policies are perceived by the policies of your organization are perceived internally and externally, and how decisions, how power moves through the organization, so how decisions get made. Next slide. We designed this tool with a participatory assessment design. So in other words, we wanted to engage a lot of participants in helping to provide that data. Human-centered design, so there are specific user features that make it easy and user-friendly. And that the design, we really wanted to focus on action, goals, and next steps. So while it collects accurate and strong information, it also helps organizations be able to take the next steps on action and goals. Next slide. So what's at the core is the assessment piece. And so people reflecting the communities that we serve, that we build a culture of inclusion inside of our organizations and with our communities, and that there is a process for equitable decisions and relationships. Next slide. Next slide, thanks. So getting started. So we created learning modules that support the assessment. So there's a learning module that before you do an assessment that gives organizations the opportunity to create leadership and commitment. So it talks about the role for your organization, preparing leadership, sharing expectations, and we talk about building brave spaces, making sure that we create an environment in which there might be folks who are uncomfortable, but we can't get to meaningful conversations about inclusion and equity if we aren't willing to have there be some discomfort inside of conversations and once we start discussing the findings. And then stewardship and progress, so leading forward motions. So this tool allows for organizations, you'll have a dashboard and a report that can be used to share the findings. There's a conversation guide. So what kind of conversations should the organization be having once the findings are reviewed? And then also that goal setting tool, again, that action-oriented next step. So next slide. So this is what the dashboard looks like for any organization who decides to subscribe to the toolkit. The assessment survey is branded for your organization, so nowhere does it say Charities Review Council. So as you're sending this assessment out, it goes, again, you can decide if it goes both internally and externally. It's mobile friendly, it's privacy protected, and you can survey unlimited stakeholder groups. Next slide. And so we have inside of our Project Champion guide, created communication for talking with your stakeholders. So making sure that you don't have to start from scratch, that we give you resources to be able to communicate with the folks that you want to participate in the survey. We also have a Project Champion step-by-step checklist. What we suggest is that organizations who leverage the toolkit, that they assign someone who can help be the guide for the journey through the toolkit. So there are steps to take before the assessment, during, and then analyzing and understanding your results and determining the next steps. So next slide. Here's examples of the facilitation resources. It has a very robust glossary because it's really important that there is consistent understanding of how words are defined, that creating shared meaning around what these things mean is really crucial to success in doing this work. And then also goal setting where you can start to map your priorities. So you want to be able to find those activities that you're able to implement while also making sure that those are efforts that have a strong impact for your organization. So there's an easy user interface. So this is the dashboard that the Project Champion would be able to access that would give them regular information about each of the surveys. So because you can do unlimited surveys, you then can go to a dashboard for each of the surveys you decide to send out and then collect data on. And so what you can see here is that every person who participates in the survey gets a unique individualized link to the survey tool. However, there's no way to connect responses to that specific email address. So again, it's privacy protected. What you can see is if people have started the survey, how far they are, or if they've completed it, so that you're able to communicate with folks, reminding them to participate in the survey. So then you can also see all the other resources that are available as part of the toolkit. So then next slide. I'm going to talk really fast so that I can leave more time for Q&A and for our other presenter. So, and this is actually how the data comes back when we're talking about process. So the people portion collects data, demographic data internally and externally, and it asks the participants in the survey how to share what their perception is of the audience that the organization is serving. So you're able to determine if your message on who you serve is being not only clearly communicated, but understood by your four survey groups, which are your board, your staff, participants, and stakeholders. When the results come back, what you find is around the process piece is you get this charted graph. So there's an average score of 1 through 5, and then it plots each of the questions. And so Phyllis will tell you about the IDI. This is a different kind of result in that it gives you data and information about all of the different questions. Then you get to dig in and determine which particular areas you want to focus your efforts on. So with this one, if you look at question 14, you can see great disparity in response between the board, participant, and staff. So not only is there's a gap, you also are not only trying to bring the perception in line with for all those audiences, you also are trying to raise the average score of responses from your survey participants. And in the next slide, we look at power. And on that slide, what we're talking about is this particular slide, the way it shows the data is it tells you on each of the questions. So this one is about identifying or prioritizing community assets and needs. So all survey participants are able to identify how well they believe each of these audiences are engaged in that priority. So on this slide, what you're seeing is that there is, while you might intend for there to be participant-centered ways to identify community assets and needs, what you're seeing is that the folks who were surveyed are not, that's not their perception of how those audiences are engaged, that there's more opportunity for you to either include participants in helping to identify or prioritize these needs, or the how you're talking about it isn't being perceived accurately. So again, lots of data and information that helps you decide if you need to change action, address communication, all kinds of ways that you can then decide how to apply what your learnings into the actions and efforts that you'll undertake to increase your cultural fluency in your organization. Next slide. So some features, you have to have at least 6 respondents, but you can have a maximum that's unlimited. The 6 is what's required in order to uphold that privacy aspect. Again, it's web and mobile optimized. Their results are format is printable. The cost model is designed for affordability, and it was set up in a way to help ensure that this is an affordable and accessible resource for nonprofits. And we have organizations that are using this tool independently of a consultant, and we also have folks who are using the tool with consultants. So next slide. So in order to be successful in doing this work, you want to make sure that there's leadership buy-in, that you find time for the organization within the organization's work to dedicate to this work, that you're committing staff support to support the efforts and activities of both executing on the toolkit and then being able to assess the findings and figure out what to do from there, that if possible to carve out dollars from your budget in order to support the efforts and activities, that you figure out where you want to start. It gives you a starting place, right? So you can have this assessment and then be able to reassess as frequently as you'd like to determine and measure if there's been progress. And again, it's really important to create brave spaces. So next slide. And the reason the Charities Review Council has this kind of a tool is that we have accountability standards that are focused on public disclosure, governance, finance, and fundraising. And one of our governance accountability standards is our diversity, equity, and inclusion standard. So when you look at our accountability standards, the why is the philosophy. What is it that we measure is the standard, and how we do that is through our review process. And what we found before we launched this toolkit in 2017 was that only 86% of organizations could meet our standard without our help. So our goal was to try and create a really affordable way for organizations to start to both get data and information, but to start to plan on how to make sure that we were advancing organizational cultural competence. So then the next slide. So how to access the toolkit. It is an annual subscription model. Currently it's priced 1 year for $500, 2 for $900, 3 for $12. We are actually, as part of our commitment we paused and reflected around the power we hold as an organization, and we're going to be announcing tomorrow at our Facebook Live session a discount of the toolkit for a 1 year subscription to $250 because we have this asset and resource, and we feel it's important. This is important work that the nonprofit sector needs to undertake. So we're going to try to do our part to make sure that cost isn't a barrier for organizations signing up to use it. And so you can purchase it online, and that we're also going to offer to make myself available if it makes sense for your leadership teams and boards in order to have a conversation around leveraging the toolkit for your organization. And I think there might be one more slide. So an upcoming, we're just launching a brand new practitioner user group webinar on how to unpack the toolkit. So anyone who has a subscription can participate in a weekly 45-minute webinar so that we can talk about how to apply it, and with guidance from the Charities Review Council, as well as learning from those folks who are already using it. We're working to add additional reporting functionality. We want to expand audience engagement. Currently it's set up for nonprofit organizations. We're looking to expand that to civic, religious, and educational organizations to take advantage of the tool itself. And then we're also going to work this year to revise and include updated language in the survey, and also additional learning modules this year. I think, and so that's my contact information, so you have that in the deck. And I think that's my last slide. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate that. And we want to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Carl Samp. I'm the Executive Director of the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation. And it's my honor and privilege to introduce Phyllis Braxton Frierson. She's the CEO and founder of Pink Consulting, LLC, and the Pink brand. She has been in the DEI field for nearly 20 years. Phyllis is a native of Moss Point, Mississippi, and has resided in Minneapolis the last 24 years. She's the daughter of Viola, mother to Ivy Zaire, and wife to Marcus Frierson III. Prior to starting Pink Consulting 13 years ago, she worked for several organizations and educational institutions. Phyllis was an adjunct professor teaching graduate level courses in diversity, received her master's degree all at the University of Minnesota, and earned her bachelor's degree from Morris Brown College in Atlanta, Georgia. Phyllis served as co-director and team leader for Minnesota Seeking Educational Equity and Diversity, SEED. She also served as an adjunct faculty member of St. Mary's University Culturally Responsive Teaching Certification Program. She is a training team member of the Blandon Foundation's Leading in Ethically Diverse Communities, a certified administrator and member of the Intercultural Development Inventory, or IDI, training faculty. She's Intercultural Conflict Styles and Cultural Detective, Myers-Briggs Type Inventory, and the Leadership Circle Profile, a 360-degree feedback leadership tool. Phyllis is the proud founder of Girl Scout River Valley's Beta Gamma Sigma Girl Scout program, started in '98, and a 25-year Silver Star member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, Inc. Finally, she graduated from St. Catherine's University and University of St. Thomas Masters of Clinical Social Work program, and is now a licensed graduate social worker. As a contract clinical therapist at Aruba Emotional Health Services, her mission is to serve and support women and girls with an emphasis on females of color affected by personal, cultural, and environmental and adverse experiences with trauma-informed and evidence-based treatment. Pink Consulting provides trauma-informed counseling, intercultural assessment, training and development, personal and professional coaching, keynote and motivational speaking to individuals and organizations nationwide. Phyllis, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today, and I'm excited to be on this panel with all of these wicked smart people that has gone before me. So I'll just jump right into setting us up to talk about another tool that you can use. And that's the way that I think this conversation has been set up in a way, is for us to have multiple tools. And Deborah gave us a tool. She gave us a theory, and there's nothing more useful than a practical theory around how we look at the systems that are already in place and how they're no longer currently working for us, and what tools we need to do to possibly dismantle those systems to create new ones that works for a more just and whole society. And Chris giving us a tool so that we can assess our organization to know where the power lies within those organizations, to really get more in-depth feedback on what people need to feel valued. And so with the IDI, we can go to my next slide. So the IDI is a tool. It stands for the Intercultural Development Inventory. And it also is based on a theory called the Intercultural Development Continuum. Next slide, please. The IDI is basically a report, and it's a profile. After you answer 50 questions online, you get a profile that gives us your individual results. If you participate with a team or an organization, we can also run a team report and an entire organizational profile, or any different aggregate scores of groups or meaningful work groups that you may have. Therefore, the IDI becomes really a way and a starting point to know where we currently are, and it creates a roadmap for our future growth. One of the things that you often hear people say in this work around diversity, equity, and inclusion is that, oh, we have so much more work to do, or, oh, we're not there yet. And so my question becomes, if we're not there yet, then where are we? And so the IDI, along with Chris's tool, gives us a way of saying, this is where we are. The IDI gives us a more interpersonal look as where we are as an individual, and how our learning and experiences is either helping us in our intercultural interactions, or it may not be getting us the impact that we want. Next slide. Oh, I might have some little transitions. Okay, there we go. Thank you for that. So this is where everyone gets to exercise their fingers a little bit. I'd like for you to just write in your chat box for me, how interculturally competent do you think most people are? If you had to rate it on a scale from 1 to 6, now, I know that right now we are in this new kind of differentness. We are in a movement moment. We have been in a movement moment since the murder of Eric Garner and up into the murder and killing of George Floyd. Things around race, around that kind of difference has been really high right now, and especially here in Minnesota. So, oh, I'm seeing the numbers come in. I see mostly 2s, some 1s, 1s and 2s. Great. Thank you. Thank you for giving me that feedback. I'm going to give you an answer to that question. Next slide, please. This is what we know, is that most people never receive any formal education or training to become interculturally competent. Yet we often expect that because we are educated, well-traveled, we're subject matter experts, that we should have the skills to be able to effectively work across culturally difference. And what we know from the research is that nothing can be further from the truth. We also know is that because people have such good intentions, I'm a native of Mississippi, as you heard in my bio, but I've lived in Minnesota now for over 20 years. And so I am familiar with the term Minnesota nice, and it has its different meanings in different contexts. But the way that I tend to take on Minnesota nice is that people really don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to give you any feedback that may be contrary to you seeing them as a good person. And so what often happens is people tend to overestimate their intercultural capability because we aren't giving people critical feedback. People are making mistakes. People might be offending other folks. People may not be as effective as they would like to be, but we're not getting the feedback because people don't, people want to be nice. And so in this work, our good intentions often get us poor results. And last, the IDI indicates that 15% of people have deep cultural self and other awareness. So what's the other percentage? I always ask, if we're working from 100. So this means 85% of the population does not currently have the skills that they need to have these difficult conversations that we're asking people to jump into. Next slide, please. So this is that intercultural development continuum. This is the theory on which the IDI is based. And basically, this theory suggests that people fall into one of 5 stages predominantly when we are interacting around cultural differences. What do I mean by predominantly? It means that, say for instance, I live in a neighborhood where I'm used to interacting across racial differences, but I may not have anyone in my community representative of the LGBT community. And so maybe I have a lot of experiences around race, but not so much around with gender identity. And so I might feel like, wow, I'm way better with differences around race and not so much around other issues. This theory lets us know that a person cannot be in one stage of development around one area of difference and in another stage around another area of difference. It's either you're in this stage or you're not. So what does that mean? That means predominantly most of the time when I have to interact with someone that is different from myself, I'm pretty much going to behave and think in the same ways. I'm not often shifting my thinking and my behavior. I may think that I am. I may even be giving the effort to try and do so, but the impact is not happening the way that I want it to be. So let me just talk really quickly about each of these stages to give you an idea of what the IDI measures. Next slide, please. So what we have here is each one of those 5 stages. I also have under each one of those stages from the research, the percentage of people that tends to fall in each of these stages. And so starting with that first stage of denial, this is where people tend to miss cultural differences. It's not that they don't see them, it's just that they really do not believe that those differences have meaningful differences. For example, if I needed healthcare services, a person in this stage of denial would believe if this person comes to the clinic, it doesn't matter who the doctors are, who the caretakers are, what kind of pictures are on the wall, what kind of languages are spoken, or what type of translations we have. None of that matters. If a person needs health care, they're gonna come here regardless. So in the stage of denial, a person is not being a racist. They're not being a sexist. They're just saying, if people want their basic needs met and we're offering those things, I don't see why people would not come here to get this service. So as you can see, a very small portion of people fall in that stage, about 3% of the population. The next stage is the stage of denial. Polarization. In this stage, this is where we have a pernicious dualism. This is where my way is better than your way, or your way is better than my way. About 12% of the population falls in this stage. We probably feel this stage happens around every 4 years in our country with major elections that happens. You see people kind of split in the C's kind of part. Either you're voting on this side or you're voting on this side. Each side is fighting for their values to be respected and held as the right way to do and to be. The next stage is the stage of minimization. As you can see, this is the stage where the majority of people fall. In this stage, this is where people tend to minimize differences and focus on commonalities. This is where you will hear the statements like all lives matter. Well, Phyllis, what's wrong with saying all lives matter? Absolutely nothing if you want to be, that's if you do not have goals to be effective across cultural differences. When we say phrases like all lives matter, what Black people especially hear is that my life doesn't matter. And in this country, when have we ever questioned that white lives did matter? And so in the stage of minimization, this is oftentimes where people who identify with the dominant culture tends to minimize the difference of the other culture and how it might be impacting them on a day-to-day basis. The other thing that happens in minimization that I think is very important to talk about is the intent. There's such good intent in the stage of minimization. That's why so many people are here. And I would suggest to you oftentimes get stuck here because it's a comfortable stage, because people are doing the best that they know to do, but they're not necessarily pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. The next stage is the stage of acceptance. As you can see, about 13% of people tend to fall in this stage. This is the stage where people not only celebrate differences, but they're able to show value to those differences without judging them. I may not necessarily know what to do about those differences, but I can empathize with those differences and stand in solidarity with those differences. The last stage is the stage of adaptation. As you can see, this is a very, very high mark to accomplish. Only 1.5% of the population currently is in this stage of development. This is where I am very secure and have an understanding of my own culture. I have the understanding and experience in at least one or more other cultures where I'm not judging those differences, but I have a deep enough understanding where I know how to bridge the differences between myself and the other while accomplishing goals. So those are the 5 stages of development. Next slide, please. These are the percentages. As you can see, that very big space underneath the bell curve, this is where the majority of folks were. What I would suggest to you in this moment, we have regressed as a society from trauma of what we saw play out with the murder of George Floyd. Should we be experiencing trauma like we currently are, given that this is something that's been happening in our country for over 400 years? Maybe not, but because it has been publicized and socialized so much, the trauma is real for people. And so instead of feeling good about differences, being open to differences, some folks have been traumatized by those differences and will actually regress back to saying, I don't want to know about differences. My way is the right way. But the thing that I'm hopeful about in this moment is that I know we also have folks in that 65% that actually got over the hump, that this unfortunate and despicable, horrible event of circumstances that led to where we are right now is often the circumstances that leads us to a movement moment. And so while we can feel paralyzed in this moment, I'm encouraged that I know from the research that while this moment may be paralyzing some folks, it's also moving some folks off the fence to actually have their words and deeds match. Next slide. So I will end, I think this might be my last slide. I just have one more after this. So as you can see, with each stage of development, there is actually an organizational, there's an intervention that we know needs to happen. And there are organizational implications of which the IDI is, it not only predicts what can happen in organization, but it gives us a prescription for what's needed for future growth and development. Last slide. And so I would be remiss in this moment if I did not just pay some homage to the life that was taken that has started us or rejuvenated us on this road to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And the next slide is my contact information, and I welcome any questions that you have. One more click, and then you'll have it all. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our panelists today. We really appreciate this provocative conversation. There are a couple of questions that have been queued up in the Q&A or the chat box. So Phyllis, the first question actually is to you about the IDI. And that is, would you recommend that boards of nonprofits or foundations also take the IDI alongside their staff? And how often do you take it? And if you're doing work, how much change would you be able to expect from IDI over time?
Thank you. All great questions. So let me just give you some, I'll respond given results that I've gotten from previous clients. So what we know from the IDI, it takes about 30 to 40 hours of intentional, developmentally appropriate interventions. That means trainings, workshops, facilitations, book clubs, excuse me, reading articles, any of those things that's developmentally appropriate, 30 to 40 hours of that for us to see a person move from one stage of development to the next stage. Answering your first question, yes, I think it is imperative for boards to have this particular framework. Why? Because they're leading the organization. Whatever they know and understand oftentimes gets funded and supported. The other thing that it does is it gives boards and it gives staff shared experiences and also shared and common language, because we know talking about this topic is hard enough. We're already walking on eggshells around it, not knowing what's the right thing to say. Do I say Black? Do I say African American? Do I say Latino X? Do I say Hispanic? What do I say Indian? Do I say Indigenous? What do? I don't want to make a mistake. And so what the IDI does is it gives us a starting point to help us understand where our blind spots might be, and then what are the interventions that we need for our individual growth and development, and if we're working for a team or an organization for that growth and development. So yes, I do think that it's important for boards to take the IDI alongside their staff, and the growth and development that you can expect with 30 to 40 hours. So when you hear people say this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, it does take that work. It's not just the one and done type things, but it does take putting in the work. But we do get results for a group that I've been working with. I worked with a group over a course of 9 months. We did a book study of white fragility, and we did the IDI before we did the book study. We gave people their individual IDI results. I took concepts out of the book that was developmentally appropriate for the audience of the book. And after we went through that 9 months of that study, that group had advanced from minimization to the stage of acceptance. And over 87% of individuals advanced individually. So those are some of the results that you can expect from the IDI when the work is done well.
Thank you, Phyllis. A follow-up question that was just submitted is, what is the ballpark cost of doing the IDI?
The IDI, the ballpark cost for the actual assessment, I think for nonprofits and educational institutions. I think the assessment runs between $20 to $25 per person. And for for-profit companies, I think it's a little bit more. Now, where the cost really comes in, or it really hits organizations and especially nonprofits, is in the interpretation. So hiring the consultant to actually give the group results so that you understand what your results mean. And if you choose and have the resources for people to get their one-on-ones, that will depend on the consultant that you hire. But from what I know, rates can run anywhere from $150 to $300 from 30 minutes to 1 hour coaching session per IDI. And that's a huge ballpark figure, but I didn't want to say it depends.
Thank you, Phyllis. I appreciate that. We are going to do one more question, and this one is to Deborah. So Deborah, a question was put into the chat box about why, with regards to your visual, why would we need to destroy the old container? And why couldn't we keep the old and add a new container so all people could find a container that holds their truth? So essentially not destroying that which some feel is already working. What thoughts would you have to share around that question?
Thank you so much for the question. And what I'd like to share is that what I introduced as the problem is also a truth. And when that truth can no longer fit into that container, the new learnings around that truth and the observations around that truth continue to develop and continue to grow, the container becomes obsolete. And it sounds like I'm speaking in ways that are so far out that you don't understand. And if I can just pull it back in a little bit, when we talked about just now the George Floyd event, for instance, in that event, when Black Lives Matter, and we say that Black Lives Matter, and that is also a truth. All lives matter. All lives matters in the container, but Black Lives Matter as well, and the lives of other people are just as important. But Black lives is not contained in the truth or in the theory in terms of what's already in the container. So by changing the container, by breaking down the container and changing the container and making it a bigger container, we can hold the theory that all lives matter in a way that's more real for the people who are impacted. And by that I mean by Black lives. So I hope that's helpful. Breaking down the container is really the only way that we can move forward. Changing that theory. And there are a lot of things that change. So if we think about rotary phones, we don't use rotary phones anymore. If we think about antennas on televisions, we don't use antennas on televisions. We don't ride in horse and buggies anymore as our main mode of transportation. As our truths and our understanding and our knowledge around things increase and improve, and as more observations are made, we put aside those old things and we develop new things. We adapt to new things. Talc powder is another thing. We've discovered talc powder causes ovarian cancer in women. And so we don't use talc powder anymore. We put it aside. We've destroyed that as something that would be useful for our society.
Thank you, Deborah. That was helpful context. I see a number of other questions that have popped in, so we will encourage you to use the contact information that'll come from us to reach out to the panelists and ask them your question as you are able. But for now, I will turn it back over to Steve for our final comments.
Well, thank you very much, Deborah and Phyllis and Chris. This is a really important topic, and one that we could spend another 3 or 4 hours on at least. And I guess from where we're at here at Community Giving, we see this as just the start and just the beginning of conversations. One of our boards has done the IDI, and it was really great to do that. And we, as an organization, are looking at a variety of ways in which we can enlighten ourselves and learn and maybe change that container as we look at our own systems and our own structures. A big part about what we've been doing initially here has also been just educating ourselves, in particular for myself as a white male. There are a number of resources out there. I had a person recommend to me the book White Rage, and it's been an excellent book for me to read. The movie 13 is another excellent movie to provide greater insights. And we have a number of resources we've added to our Idea Center. It can be found at CF Idea Center or at ideacenter.communitygiving.org. And it's also a place where people can have conversations and communicate with one another. Again, that's at ideacenter.communitygiving.org. But I want to thank our speakers today for enlightening us and sharing their thoughts. And this is a journey. It's not a sprint, it is a marathon. And we will continue to have these conversations and appreciate all of you who have joined us. And if you have thoughts, ideas, questions, please email us at info@communitygiving.org. We'd be happy to hear your thoughts and opinions. And we are going to be looking at other ways we can continue to elevate the issue and have further conversations. And again, if you have ideas or thoughts on that, please email any of the executive directors or at info@communitygiving.org. Next week, we will be back with a topic that is also on the minds of several nonprofits at least, and that is about managing endowments during this time of change and volatility. A little bit different angle. But on this particular topic of race, please keep an eye out. We will be continuing this conversation in other ways as well. So thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best and hope to hear from you in the future. Thank you.